Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
After a hunting trip, I waited in the small town of Los Pinos, New Mexico, for the late southbound train. I sat on the porch of the Summit House and talked about life with Telemachus Hicks, the hotel owner. Noticing that we were getting along well, I asked him about the animal that had hurt his left ear. Since I'm a hunter, I'm interested in the dangers of hunting. That ear, said Hicks, is a reminder of a true friendship. Was it an accident? I asked. No, friendship isn't by chance, replied Telemachus, and I stayed quiet. The only perfect example of true friendship I've seen, continued Hicks, was between a man from Connecticut and a monkey. The monkey climbed palm trees in Barranquilla and dropped coconuts to the man. The man split the coconuts in half, made cups from them, sold them for 2 coins each, and bought rum. The monkey drank the coconut milk. They were both happy with their share and lived like brothers. But with humans, friendship can be temporary and end suddenly. I once had a friend named Paisley Fish, and I thought our friendship would last forever. We did everything together for 7 years, mining, ranching, selling churns, herding sheep, taking photos, building fences, and picking prunes. I thought nothing could come between us. We were business partners and enjoyed our free time together. We had good times like Damon and Pythias. One summer, Paisley and I went to the San Andres Mountains for a month of relaxation, dressed casually. We visited Los Pinos, a friendly town with a few streets, some chickens, and a restaurant by the railroad. After supper, we decided to try the food at the restaurant. As we sat down, Widow Jessup came in with hot biscuits and fried liver. Widow Jessup was a large woman with a warm smile. She seemed welcoming and friendly. Widow Jessup talked a lot about the weather, history, Tennyson, prunes, and the lack of mutton. Then she asked where we were from. Spring Valley, I said. Big Spring Valley, Paisley added with his mouth full of food. That was the first sign that me and Paisley Fish's friendship was over. He knew I didn't like talkative people, but he still talked a lot. On the map, it was called Big Spring Valley, but Paisley usually just called it Spring Valley. After supper, we went to sit on the railroad track. We had been partners for too long not to understand each other. You know, said Paisley, I've decided to marry Widow Jessup and make her a part of my life forever, in every way. Yes, I replied, I figured that out even though you didn't say much. And you know I plan to marry her too and change her name to Hicks. Your plan might not work, said Paisley, chewing on a piece of wood. I'd agree with you on anything else, but not this. Dealing with women is tricky. Friendship can get ruined in these situations. I'd do anything to help you, but not this time. I'm telling you this honestly. Then, I suggested a fair solution. I said, friendship between men is important. It dates back to ancient times when men had to protect each other from big lizards and flying turtles. Why should a woman come between us? Let's both try to win her over. I'll court her in front of you so we both have a fair chance. That way our friendship won't be affected, no matter who she chooses. Good idea, said Paisley, shaking my hand. I'll do the same. We'll both court her respectfully and remain friends no matter what happens. There was a bench under some trees next to Widow Jessup's restaurant where she used to sit after serving food to the train passengers. Paisley and I would go there after supper and try to win her affections. We were polite and waited for each other if one of us arrived first. On the first evening that Mrs. Jessup knew about our plan, I got to the bench before Paisley. Supper was over and Mrs. Jessup was there, wearing a pink dress. I sat next to her and talked about the beauty of nature around us. The moon was shining in the sky, the trees cast shadows on the ground, and there were sounds of animals in the bushes. The wind blew gently, making a soothing sound. I felt something strange in my heart when Mrs. Jessup moved closer to me. "Oh, Mr. Hicks," she said, "don't you feel lonelier on such a beautiful night when you're alone in the world?" I stood up immediately. "Sorry, ma'am," I said, "but I want to wait for Paisley before discussing such serious topics." I explained to her how Paisley and I were friends for many years and had agreed not to take advantage of each other in matters of love. Mrs. Jessup thought about it for a moment and then burst into laughter. A few minutes later, Paisley joined us and started telling a sad story about a cowskinner named Pieface Lumley. From the beginning of our courtship, I had a plan to win Mrs. Jessup's heart. Each of us had our own way of trying to impress her. Paisley liked to tell grand stories, but that didn't work well in real life. Now I'll tell you the right way to hold a woman's hand. Imagine you're picking up a rock to throw at a cat. Pretend you don't have anything in your hand. Don't grab her hand too eagerly or awkwardly. That was my tactic. Paisley's stories didn't impress Mrs. Jessup much. One night, when I got to the bench before Paisley, I asked Mrs. Jessup if she thought H was easier to write than J. She leaned towards me, but I didn't do anything. "Let's wait for Paisley," I said, standing up. "I don't want to do anything unfair to our friendship." "Mr. Hicks," said Mrs. Jessup, looking at me strangely, "if it wasn't for one thing, I'd ask you to stop coming to my house." "What's that, ma'am?" I asked. "You would make a good husband," she said. A few minutes later, Paisley joined us. In Silver City, in the summer of '98, Paisley begins, "I saw Jim Bartholomew get into a fight with a Chinaman in the Blue Light Saloon over a striped shirt that, what was that noise?" I resumed my conversation with Mrs. Jessup right where we left off. "Mrs. Jessup," I said, "has promised to marry me. And this is another step in the same direction." Paisley shifted on the bench and made a noise. "Lem," he said, "we've been friends for 7 years. Could you please not kiss Mrs. Jessup so loudly? I would do the same for you." "Sure," I said. "The softer kiss will do." This Chinaman, Paisley continues, was the one who had a fight with a man named Mullins in the spring of '97, and that was. Paisley stopped himself again. "Lem," he said, "if you were a true friend, you wouldn't hug Mrs. Jessup so tightly." The bench shook just now. "You promised me a fair chance." "Mr. Mann," Mrs. Jessup turned to Paisley, "if you were to come to our celebration 25 years from now, do you think you could understand that you're not part of this? I've tolerated you because you were Lem's friend, but it's time for you to leave." "Mrs. Jessup," I said, holding on to my role as fiancé, "Mr. Paisley is my friend, and I gave him a fair chance as long as there was one." "A chance," she said. "Well, he might think he has won, but I hope he doesn't think it's guaranteed after what he's been up to all evening." A month later, Mrs. Jessup and I got married in the Los Pinos Methodist Church, and the whole town came to watch. As we stood in front, ready for the ceremony to start, I noticed Paisley was missing. I stopped the preacher. "We have to wait for Paisley," I said. "Once a friend, always a friend, that's Telemachus Hicks," I declared. Mrs. Jessup looked annoyed, but the preacher continued with the ceremony. Eventually, Paisley rushed up the aisle, adjusting his cuff as he came. He explained that the only store open was closed, so he had to break in to get the right shirt. He stood beside the bride, and the wedding continued. I thought Paisley might have hoped the preacher would accidentally marry him to the widow. After the ceremony, we had tea and food, and then everyone left. Paisley shook my hand and thanked me for being fair. The preacher had a small house he rented out, and he let Mrs. Hicks and me stay there until our train to El Paso the next morning for our honeymoon. His wife had decorated it with flowers, and it looked lovely. Around 10 o'clock that night, I sat on the doorstep, enjoying the cool breeze while Mrs. Hicks was inside. When the light went out, I heard her call, "Aren't you coming in soon, Lem?" Well, I said, waking up a bit. I was waiting for old Paisley to. But before I could finish, I felt a sharp pain in my left ear. It turned out Mrs. Hicks had hit me with a broom handle.